Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. It is I, your host Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement, and I'm joined by my co-host P. How goes it, P?
As always, it goes fantastically. Let's dive into it, man. What has happened since yesterday? How are you doing? Are you centered? Are your chakras aligned? Are you ready to Bitcoin?
I've been living under a rock for the past 21 hours, so no idea whatsoever what's happened. I heard this guy, Jerry, is talking to a bunch of old folks down in D.C., telling them about some money printer business, but also not.
Maybe friend of the show, Jerry?
Friend of the show, longtime contributor to, thinning out your wallets, short-time contributor to hyper-Bitcoinization, Jerry Powell. I mean, so for those who are not picking up the clues we're putting down, Jerome Powell is in DC talking to Congress for people living under a rock for the last 21 hours, in case you didn't realize that. To be completely honest with you,
Please be honest.
I've skimmed our Slack channel news team and their highlights, and honestly, it's just made me laugh because everyone's so angry over A, the softball questions being asked, B, the non-answer answers that Jerome Powell is giving, and C, the lack of economic understanding in the questions being asked by Congress. That is to say, we're all fucked.
No.
Great day to have. Great, David Zell. I was about to say Grant Zell. Honestly, they morphed into the same person anyways, in my opinion. So we'll be joined by David Zell of the Bitcoin Advocacy
Policy
Project?
Institute.
Policy, I forget the name of it. That three-letter acronym that starts with a B. So David Zell will be joining us later, and then of course we'll be joined by Jimmy Song as well. But let's talk Papa Powell a little bit longer. It's interesting to me that he is coming to terms with, after we heard Janet Yellen admit a few weeks back, we were her saying I was wrong about transitory inflation, and Powell has alluded to saying, I might be wrong about transitory inflation. I might have been wrong about transitory inflation. The main question I want to ask and present to you is, who the fuck is keeping him accountable? Did I curse too early in the stream? Did YouTube just kill us? You're also muted, P, so no idea what you're saying, but sharp.
You're killing it. You're killing it is what I was trying to say. No, I said you cursed at exactly the right time. There's all these algorithms that decide whether you get fucked over YouTube, because YouTube is a centralized, central bank controlled digital video platform. And so we always have to be optimizing for their algorithm, but also we don't really give a fuck. So we swear all the time and kind of do whatever we want. But yeah, I'm curious to see. I haven't read the notes from the conversation that's happening right now. I'm curious if there's anything specific that you found particularly interesting. And you're muted.
I pulled a P. I think it's very interesting that you are now hearing Powell's rhetoric change. You're hearing him come out and say, I was wrong, inflation may not be transitory. You're hearing a lot of conversations around the inevitability of a, recession going on.
That old chestnut.
Sorry?
I know you hate it when I interrupt you. I said that old chestnut, recession, that old thing that, the boogeyman. But keep going. Now that I've broken your train of thought.
No, it's fine. To be honest, I was so thrown because I started seeing YouTube chats here on the Restream channel, and then I was like, I'm on a YouTube stream that's different. What the fuck's going on, guys? So for everyone who is just catching up, tuning in, welcome to the right stream for today's episode. For everyone who has been here the whole time watching us ramble, I appreciate your kindness and patience. But in the most political fashion, P has not answered the question I presented to him. So mind your P's and Q's, bro, and answer the fucking question. Who's going to keep Jerome Powell and these assholes accountable? Because there seems to be no accountability when they get things wrong.
Yeah, I think, I always find it very interesting when I interact with people who view the news as it's reported by, the major news outlets, and also, the White House, the Fed, as being kind of the truth, or even the truth as those entities see it. And that is not what is happening here, right? These are very, very carefully orchestrated narratives that are being constructed in real time by all the entities involved. And they all have their own incentives to present things in a certain way. Major news media, whether it's, whether you're a fan of Fox News or you're a fan of CNN or, the New York Times, they're all bullshit. They're all there to do one thing, which is to drive up viewership and to create this sense of outrage and excitement and engagement. So when you start understanding that where the incentives are, what they are structurally trying to do, it becomes a lot clearer. But I'm always surprised by the number of people who think of all of these entities as people who are just like, they're doing the best they can. They're trying to say truth as they understand it. That's not what's happening. They're trying to do these other things. So the White House trying to push narratives that support, people getting reelected and kind of people staying in their lane and doing what they're supposed to be doing and not freaking out or, grabbing the pitchforks. And news outlets, they're trying to just drum up engagement, stay in their lane, speak to their specific audiences, and keep them fired up against whatever boogeyman they're presenting in real time. So you ask the question, who is going to keep these people in check? And the answer is, it's all of us, right? If we are not holding these people accountable, no one else will. And that doesn't necessarily mean, doing what you and I do, Q, which is, going live every day and kind of just talking about this stuff. There are a million different ways to, honestly, more effectively in many cases, take a stance against the things that we all care about, which is, one of those things is trying to escape from this central bank controlled, digital apartheid. And whether that's, learning about Bitcoin, educating yourself, figuring out how you can contribute meaningfully to helping the people that you care about and the causes that you care about. These are all ways to hold these people accountable, but no one else will, if not all of us.
So I want to read a paraphrased quote right now. The Federal Reserve Chair Powell says U.S. debt is growing faster than the economy. Quote, we don't need to pay the debt down. End quote. Paraphrasing from our very own Namcios on our Slack channel. So if this is not legit, my bad, but it's Namcios. So I trust his word. I trust his judgment. That is an absurd thought to think about. And if I'm a U.S. debt holder, I'm sitting there watching this or hearing this thinking to myself, well, I'm going to dump whatever U.S. debt I'm holding, even if it means I'm going to start taking losses on it. We've heard the conversation. Like, how many, show of hands, how many of you guys watched Preston and McCormick's conversation that was released earlier this week? All right, P, kick him off the screen for a little bit. Chris, it'll just be you and I. So it's that whole thing that Preston's talking about, how, look, you can get this 3% yield on a bond on 8% inflation, and while it is considered a liability because it's a net loss, you still have the opportunity to beat inflation in this weird way. Same psychological sort of framework here, where it's like, hey, if the person who's supposed to pay me this debt back is saying they're not going to pay me this debt back, and I could just sell it right now for a loss, and I'd either sell it for a loss right now or potentially just never collect on this, might as well just sell it for a loss and like move on. And what happens when too many U.S. debt holders make that same decision over and over and over again? Supply and demand. As demand decreases and supply increases, what happens to price? That was the moment for your sound effect, P. Come on.
Yeah, I guess Q.
I got
Q,
you,
I'll
fam.
flip the question back to you. So you being, I've paid off my college debt, and P, we know went to college back in the 1930s when
paid a
college
nickel
prices
for-
were very cheap.
I came
And
in with
yeah,
a bag full of coins, and I was like, "Here you go, registrar. Does this get me where I need to be?" And they were like, "No, but
this
for
pays
you,
off 4 years and a fifth if you want it. So
He actually
Sexual
was
favors and
alive
good to
when
go.
a half penny was a unit of exchange.
goddamn right."
but Q, I guess flipping it back to you as someone that has outstanding college debt, not to put you on the spot, but you're like, with Jerome Powell saying this, you're like, I'm gonna get my debt like forgiven is basically what I'm reading
Yeah,
into
Q,
it. If you
Q played the game
100%.
correctly.
If I do, like, if you assholes for like no reason, some random ass debt that you just have that's just like, hey, we're good. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And then it's put on the backs of, like, mind you, there's a lot of nuances to the college debt issue, and I'm going to piss off a lot of people. But here's the fact of the matter. I have an undergrad degree in finance, and because of the way both the minimum wage laws are and the way the college loan sort of refinancing system is in place, like, I just got royally fucked. I went into 2 different systems that took advantage of the laws in place. So I don't give a shit what you say. That is like the perfect case study of, I have a great degree, I had a great career, and it was just the systems allowed for people to take advantage of workers. I don't want to hear it from anyone else. I know that that's not going to sit well with a lot of Bitcoiners, but I'm feeling hot today. So that was my 2 cents. Absolutely. If my college debt is not forgiven after the US just says, fuck it, we're not going to pay our own debts off. Fuck you. I'm not going to pay you back.
So I have this theory. I know a number of people who I respect greatly. You are one of them, Q, who I feel like in this group of people who have a significant amount of debt from going to college, it feels like their entire worldview has been warped by the idea that the Democrats are the ones who are most likely to forgive college debt. Like, I know this group of people who are, I feel like, should be, I don't want to say, Bitcoiners. There's a lot there's Bitcoiners of all stripes, but I find this like recurring theme. It's like when people are super kind of pro-liberal agendas, when I don't quite understand why, I am surprised by the number of them who have a significant debt and they expect the Democrats to be the ones to forgive that debt versus the Republicans. I wonder if, I don't know, what do you think? Is that an insane person's claim, or?
It's not, it's not, but it is. And it is.
You just said yes. You said it's totally reasonable, and that's why you vote Democrat.
I'll be honest. Like, I voted fully independent until what was it? What was the second asshole that Trump put into the Supreme Court? Kavanaugh. During that hearing, for myself, I think it really resonated, that old saying of like, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And there are no values in the Republican Party, in my opinion, other than just Republican, versus you have this spectrum in the Democratic Party. And that's part of the reason why the Democrats can't get anything done, because someone like Joe Manchin and AOC are technically in the same party, and they are just 2 polar opposites in their own right. Fully on board with the idea of a 3-party system, and the 2-party system has ruined our country. But there's never been a single Republican who's come out and run on a campaign promise of saying, hey, student loan debt is an issue. Let's figure it out. Let's tackle it. It's only been a talking point, and I'm going to say just a talking point, of Democrats. So I think that's part of the reason why you see that instinctive draw towards Democrats in that issue in particular. It also goes back to the old principle of Democrats are willing to spend more government money while the Republicans aren't. And I think a lot of Republicans look at certain things like debt and student loan debt more as an investment vehicle for the country than it should be for an investment vehicle in the next generation. But that, I don't even think the Democrats look at it like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that I don't identify with either party. I think of, I've said this before, but I think of them as being kind of the Washington Generals and the Harlem Globetrotters. Which is to say, they are owned by and operated by the same centralized group, and the Democrats and the Republicans basically just switch roles. The Harlem Globetrotters are like the trick team, that like does these crazy backflips, and they're like, "I got this." And
I know that. I'm just like, who do you think is the Globetrotters here?
It doesn't matter. My point is they switch every 4 to 8 years.
I see what you're saying.
And so like that's the game, right? It doesn't actually matter. And you can even sort of use this very crude, I will admit, analogy across like much larger timescales, right? The things that the Democrats versus the Republicans represented throughout the history of this country has shifted very, very dramatically. The Democrats, back 100 years ago, or whatever it is, the Democrats represented a lot of the values that the Republicans currently represent, and vice versa. And it just sort of morphs over time as these groups try to create these political bases that they can use to kind of drive the direction of the company. The country, which is often run somewhat like a company. So anyway, I want to also shift to some of the news that is coming out, or that has come out recently, and specifically yesterday. Unless you have anything else to say on that note, Q.
No, I did want to. I'm not done with the Powell stuff.
Oh, go for it.
So another sort of rhetoric that Powell is really hammering home here is the idea that inflation is not caused by an increase in the monetary supply. I don't know how many people in the Bitcoin realm actually buy that narrative, but that is what he's saying to Congress, and Congress has not been saying anything different. They've been giving us everything from supply chain to Putin, whatever. And you have Jerome Powell coming out there further enhancing that rhetoric without taking responsibility for both quantitative easing and then the approach of quantitative tightening. I mean, look, I will say it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I could have done a lot better job than Powell. Most people won't have I totally lost my train of thought.
You were claiming that you were better than Powell in every way.
Oh yes,
emotionally,
I totally could have been a
sexually.
better Fed chief. I totally would have made better decisions here. I'm not going to tell you what they would have been, but just know that my decision making would have been a lot better. But like, let's talk about this narrative that gets spun up. We had Joe Carlasari on the show with us about a month ago, and we had this conversation where he brought up the idea that inflation is really caused by increased spending, and increased spending happens when there's more money getting spent or sent out in the economy, either through something like the UBI that we saw with these checks, or with low or zero interest rates. And it helps boost and causes more spending, i.e. demand goes up, but supply stays stagnant. Or even during COVID, when we had supply chain shocks, supply goes down. So inevitably you see these prices go up. So there is, I think, a valid argument and case to be made around that. But I don't think things like quantitative easing and the excessive amount of money that was printed and injected into the economy did any favors. I'm curious how much weight do you put on the supply chain versus the Fed's issues? Because I don't think neither event caused the inflation we're having outright. It was a blend of these things, and I'm curious if, like, you're mixing a little potion in your witch's brew. How much supply chain issues are you putting in, and how much quantitative easing are you putting into the cauldron?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I forget who we were speaking with. Was it a couple days back who was actually kind of really hammering into this point? And I actually don't have a great answer. I won't pretend to spend a lot of time focusing in on the kind of macro and economic environment. I think it's super important and it affects everything, which is why I think, why I enjoy these conversations here live, because I get to learn from all of them. I definitely held the belief that the kind of inflation narrative and the inflation, since 2008 was the inflation of the monetary supply was a primary factor here. So that is to say, printing more money leads to inflation, end of story, full stop. I think we are seeing, as you have suggested here, that it is more nuanced and complicated than that, which is not surprising. Most things are not simple. But, I mean, I couldn't give you like a percentage, you know, it would just be me kind of like guessing out of my ass, but I'll do it anyway. 70-30. I think it's 70%, you know, increase in monetary supply, 30% supply chain bullshit. But again, that's based on, you know, which way the winds are blowing. I do think it is a combination of the two though. And it's certainly more than I thought previously.
Chris, what's your witch's brew?
My witch's brew, it's kind of like a chicken and the egg, and I hate saying that, but when we do quantitative easing, it's kind of like Reaganomics, that the money goes to the wealthy people first, or the banks, or the BlackRocks, or the Vanguards, or the Fidelities. As Greg Voss says, they are the movers of the market. When you're trading hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars, like, you know, I know we have a lot of Bitcoin. We have at least 6.15 Bitcoin, each of us on this call, but we are not moving the credit markets.
I wish I had that many Bitcoin. That's a lot of fucking Bitcoin.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
I lost all mine in a boating accident recently.
Wait, you have any Bitcoin at all? I thought this is a BTC Cash show.
Jesus Christ.
All right. Now we're kicking him off. So
yeah, kick him off.
I'm be talking right to P for a little bit. So chicken and the egg theory is, as they are doing, I'll pull him back on. He looks lonely there.
For the audience, Bitcoin is the only Bitcoin. There is a lot of bullshit out there that tries to affinity scam on Bitcoin. It gets very confusing because there's like bitcoin.com, bitcoin.org. There's all these bullshit. It's Bitcoin. BTC is the only thing worth looking into and understanding.
Yeah. So I guess going to the quantitative thing, when they're, aside from doing the stimulus checks, which is like a form of UBI or universal basic income, when they're doing quantitative easing, the people that get the benefit are stockholders, because as these large credit corporations, BlackRock, Fidelity, all of them, they are selling their bonds back to the Federal Reserve because they're buying them and in way injecting cash into that business. And then those corporations buy the stocks. We saw the stock prices go up. And if you're able to own equities, you get the benefit of that. And then that's how it like trickles down. But it's kind of the Cantillon effect. Like if you are swapping your treasuries for freshly printed money, you're getting the money first and you can buy whatever assets. Normally, you're buying, obviously, stocks. But then we even saw later on that BlackRock saw that everything was oversold and overbought. So then they started buying single family homes. Like this is the issue that we run into. They're like looking like, oh, stocks are so overvalued. We need to start parking our cash elsewhere in single family homes. So then people like millennials, I know P already is, you know, part of the traditional generation or the baby boomer generation, how old he is, that he has a multitude of family homes that his family can use. But yeah, it makes it much harder for the millennials and the Zoomers in order to buy their first homes because of this, the money printing and the Cantillionaire effect. So I hate saying it's like chicken and the egg, but the supply chain shortages are happening because they're trying to buy more and more things. They're trying to buy lumber to build more homes, but like they're just artificially propping up the price of everything. So I'd say maybe I'll go like, it's like 50-50, but it's like kind of like it's 100% in the beginning. And then it slowly shifts over to all the other stuff in the as well, the supply chains.
I agree with that, Chris, with the exception and caveat that in this instance, there was a supply chain shock. Like that was independent to quantitative easing. And if anything, I would actually argue that quantitative easing was caused or triggered by the supply chain shock. Not necessarily that there were supply chain issues in effect, but the shutdown was the supply chain shock. And if I have the timeline in my head correct, the shutdowns happened and then we started seeing quantitative easing. So yeah, in a normal circumstance, I do agree with that logic and rationale. Given, I think, what we saw in COVID, I think that's like the exception.
Yeah, I think that's a great counterpoint too. So I guess when you're thinking about it, China is really, not only do they supply the West, as in the United States, Canada, and a lot of Central and South America, they kind of supply the world for a lot of stuff. So when China was taking very hard stances in early 2020 or even the tail end of 2019 of starting to shut down cities and ports, like that ripples through the economy. And to your point, our way of counteracting the goods not coming in is we started printing money to prop up asset prices so then you could buy the goods that you want. Yeah, maybe it's very much the chicken and the egg. What came first? It's like, could you blame the thing that happened in 2020, the lockdowns as we call them, or do you blame the quantitative easing and what came first? I guess in theory, the lockdowns came first and then it led to the money printing. But what's at fault? It remains to be seen, I guess.
There's also something you said that has my mind racing. And I really want to have someone who's more of an expert in the housing market come on the show. So we're going to brainstorm on that after this show. But everyone keeps calling for a collapse of the housing market. I don't know if we're going to see a collapse of the housing market because the biggest buyer has so much money. And all you're really going to see is individuals get priced out. But BlackRock's not the only private equity firm doing this. So while they're not going to the nicest neighborhoods, and maybe the wealthiest families won't get priced out and they'll still be able to buy these single family homes. But I unfortunately think the middle class homes and below will not see a housing market correction. However, it takes 4 $250,000 homes to equal $1 million home. So while these super high priced homes, like for the wealthier classes, may see a correction and those house prices may drop, the middle and lower income housing affordable units, that level of housing, that will stay steady because that's what BlackRock and these companies are buying. So it will look to a degree like the housing market is decreasing because the most expensive houses, the highest price point houses, are decreasing. So watch for data that's going to say things like the percent of the down payment has gone down, or things like the overall cost for houses has decreased by this percent. These are going to be like really weird data points that they're going to throw out at us that'll make it look like there's a housing market correction. But then when you actually go into the weeds, you'll see, hey, wait a minute. This house that was listed for $2.5 million. Okay, yeah, it's now $1.7 million. But this house that was $300,000 is $350,000. Again, that difference, that shift in price, mind you, there are a lot more houses at that $300,000 price point. I also have a very skewed perception of the housing market coming from Southern California. I know, I understand that, but just hear me out on this. It will not affect the higher class of people. It will be spun to look like everything is looking the way we all expected, but it's not. And when they start giving you the narrative of the housing market is collapsing, I urge you to take the time to go look at what those middle price point houses and the lower price point houses are actually doing versus 3-6 months ago. And those housing prices won't change nearly as much as the $1, $2, $5 million houses. But that's just my tinfoil hat prediction.
What do you think, Chris?
I guess you have anything, Pete, or do you want me to go for that?
No, go for it.
I agree. I don't know. It's tough because BlackRock, when they're outbidding people 20%, 25%, 50% on houses, if the housing market rolls over, the prices will return to the more normalized rate. And at a point, BlackRock will either have to write off on their balance sheet or they're going to have to ride out for 10 to 15 years in order to write off on 10 to 15 years of trying to wait for the house to appreciate to that level again. I don't know. I mean, BlackRock has enough money that they could do it, but BlackRock's in the business of making money that they won't want to. You know what I mean? Like, I could definitely see them trying to flip over houses. Like, we pumped up the price, it goes up another 5%, and we're going to try and dump it on someone else or get them into debt. They'll gladly offer you the loan for the house that they just bought.
I don't think they're looking to sell these properties.
You think?
They can hold this on their balance sheet as an asset, even if it depreciates, because ultimately what you've recreated is the cable subscription model. You now have a monthly subscription that you have to pay to BlackRock, i.e. your fucking rent. And they'll bite the cost of a decline in the housing market because it's still an asset on your balance sheet. And then you're collecting rent for ever. So I think it's I do see the side of the argument that you bring up, Chris, that, hey, they were overpaying for some of these houses. Like, the market will decline. Like, are they really going to be able to afford these losses? Unfortunately, I do think the answer is yeah. Like, this is BlackRock. This isn't like some mom and pop little boutique that's only in the housing business and just started in 2020. This is the largest financial institute that literally owns 23andMe, for Christ's sake. Like, they own your
I will
DNA.
caveat, they kind of started the 2008 financial crash, so I think you might be giving them a little bit too much credit. So
I'm not trying to give them, like, I want to depict them like the fucking, like, villainous organization that they are. Like, these people own your fucking DNA, and now they want to own your home, and we're just letting it happen because they pay enough money to, as P's point, both the Harlem Globetrotters and the Washington Generals.
Well said.
But,
guys, should we get ready to shift over to our next conversation? There's one other thing.
We're ready.
Okay, there's one other thing that I want to point out, which is something that Odell tweeted about, and Swan Bitcoin did a really great sort of detailed analysis of the claims that were being made in it. Basically, Trail of Bits, which is an analysis company, has released a DARPA-funded report on Bitcoin and Ethereum. And they fucked up so many specific points in it. It's laughable. I highly recommend that you go to the Swan Bitcoin blog and read through it. They did a really good job of taking down some of the things that were just patently false. They are clearly trying to present Bitcoin as something that is not robust and can be easily attacked. And I think that one of the most effective ways to learn about Bitcoin is to read and hear through podcasts some of the rebuttals to some of the false claims that are made, because otherwise you just get swamped by the FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is constantly promoted. You know, some of the classic ones are Bitcoin's bad for the environment, false. Bitcoin is for criminals, false. There's a bunch of them, but I'd highly recommend you check this out because it'll give you a really good understanding of how, you know, government-supported entities are often trying to just spread false narratives. Speaking of which, we have an incredible guest coming up, David Zell, who is an amazing figure in the political space and is taking the fight to that arena. We're going to go to commercial, and then we'll be right back with David Zell.
What is up, guys? Welcome back, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today. He is none other than national debate champion, former, I'm going to just say go Roll Tide or whatever shit. I think he graduated high school a couple of years ago and then graduated college in like 2 years. Welcome, David Zell. How you doing, man?
You did not do David justice. That was the most
interesting introduction.
That was I love you. That was fucking terrible. David, I want to tell a story. The first time I met David, he did a backflip and then out of nowhere, totally unexpected, and then punched a hole through a wall next to us and pulled a physical Bitcoin out of the wall. And I was like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, that's not a thing. Bitcoin is a digital currency. And he did it anyway. David, you've done an incredible amount in the space. I would love to hear your summary of who you are, what you're about, and why what you're doing is important.
Yeah, sure. So I'm David. I first started using Bitcoin when I was in 7th grade. So that was like, I guess, fall of 2013. Wasn't until later that I kind of started getting more into the space and like actually learning about Bitcoin. I was actually just using it for a while. But since then, I've done different things. Definitely a cypherpunk kind of at my core, and I spent a while working to sort of derail capital market, sort of private market investment into private prisons. So I led an organization for a little over a year that disrupted about $3 billion worth of private prison financing. And then I started moving into like Bitcoin policy work. So I worked as the head of policy at Bitcoin Magazine for like 9 or 10 months, and then left there to start BPI, which is the nonprofit think tank called the Bitcoin Policy Institute. And we do a lot of cool research on Bitcoin. We also do research on sort of other things as they're relevant to Bitcoin. So we talk about stable coins. We compare proof of work and proof of stake. And most of our work is centered around sort of educating lawmakers in DC. So yeah, that's me.
You also did an amazing job hosting one of my favorite panels at Bitcoin 2022 with Andrew Yang, Joe Jorgensen, Alan Farrington, and incredible journalist Glenn Greenwald on kind of overcoming idea inertia.
Mm-hmm.
You've done a bunch of great stuff.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. Meeting Glenn was fun. Meeting Andrew Yang was fun. And Joe is just so cool. She is like I know like people, it's a cringe thing to say, but Joe Jorgensen is the least politician-y of any politician that I've met. Like Joe instantly kind of just feels like a friend. So yeah, shout out to Joe Jorgensen. She's pretty cool.
Yep. I could not agree with you more. I want to talk about the work that you're doing right now around the financial inclusion letter that you guys just put out. Can you talk to us about what that is, why it's important, and what you're trying to achieve with that letter?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of weeks ago, a group of global technology experts, notably like functionally none of them, used a currency other than the dollar or the euro, wrote a letter to Congress, sort of in support of what they called responsible crypto policy. And in this letter, they just say a bunch of things that aren't true. The notable kind of claims, however, at least the ones that stood out to me, were sort of the arguments that Bitcoin had no real world utility, that it was a solution in search of problems. And their criticisms were about crypto overall. And so it was weird because in some ways I read that letter and agreed with a lot of it in reference to like the crypto industry overall, which is certainly like rife with scams and are worth denouncing. But in their letter, they kind of just ignore the sort of lives of like basically half the world who live either under authoritarianism, which is 56% of people on the entire planet live under authoritarianism. 1 billion people live with like massive inflation and many of them hyperinflation. And it's here, sort of at the edges of the sort of modern, connected, globalized world, where people that are living lives that most of us in the West could never imagine use Bitcoin not to speculate, but as a critical tool. And so when this letter came out, for their claims to be true, these global tech experts, you have to kind of just accept that the stories that, for example, Alex Gladstein has worked for several years now to shed light on, just like aren't true, or that those people aren't real. To say that Bitcoin is a solution in search of problems is to tell these people that their problems aren't real, that they're not real. And so I thought it was really important to make that obvious. So they registered the domain concerned.tech. So I registered the domain financialinclusion.tech. And I encourage anyone who's watching this to go to that website, because when you do, you'll find some samplings of mainstream news articles that have referenced Bitcoin's role for those facing authoritarianism or economic crisis. And then you'll find a letter which was sent to Congress that sort of details the experiences of the authors. So it was signed by 21 human rights activists from 20 different countries, including Gary Kasparov, chess grandmaster, Alex Gladstein of the Human Rights Foundation, Farida Yemeni, like all of these incredible activists from all over the world wrote this powerful, powerful letter. And so I just sort of played the role in facilitating it. So, made the website and, had our team at BPI make sure that it got into the right hands, and sort of coordinated that. But this is really about the authors of the letter. I coordinated it, but it would be far more powerful for someone watching this to just go read the letter instead of hear me talk about it, because the way that they explain how Bitcoin has, it hasn't been a meme, it hasn't been a speculative vehicle. It has worked when like nothing else did. And there's one line that I think is worth highlighting from this letter. I mean, they're all like bangers, and it's an incredible sort of testament to Bitcoin's power and prominence. But they say, to most in the West, the horrors of monetary colonialism, misogynist financial policy, frozen bank accounts, exploitative remittance companies, and an inability to connect to the global economy may be distant ideas. To most of us and our communities, and to the majority of people worldwide, they are daily realities. If there were, quote, far better solutions already in use to overcome these challenges, we would know. And yeah, it's just everyone should read it.
Very powerful stuff. I mean, especially in this country and most Western and developed nations, we have the privilege, I think, of not really having to give thought or consideration to our money, where it comes and how we're really using it. Talk to us a little bit about some of the conversations that you've been having with the U.S. government around the necessity for Bitcoin to exist in an economy that maybe has a more functioning currency or money.
Yeah. Wait, sorry. Is the question about sort of conversations?
What's your conversations
about financial...
with U.S. Congressmen people around Bitcoin?
Yeah, so they're pretty far-ranging. I would say a couple of baskets of conversations are most common. So I guess to start, I think there are elevating national security concerns, particularly in the like Biden administration, about Bitcoin. The sort of climate, like ESG stuff gets a lot of attention and is certainly a place where regulators and policymakers are looking. But in a lot of ways, I think national security drives tech policy. And Bitcoin is just a policy issue. It's really no different from a regulatory or policy standpoint. Well, I take that back. From a tech policy perspective, it's just not that different, right? You understand what the internet is. You can explain to someone that Bitcoin is like the internet of money. And in these tech policy conversations, historically, national security has been like a driving piece. So I'll give a quick example. The debate around sort of breaking up big tech. So our antitrust laws in the United States are super old. They were written to apply to sort of monopolies of supply, like think sort of the oil barons of like the early 1900s. And so many have argued that what we experience now are not monopolies of supply, but are monopolies of demand. So think of companies like Amazon, who have better data than anyone else. And they're able to get companies, they're able to sort of leverage that data to get more users, to get more data, to get more users, et cetera. So it's a big problem. People are concerned about it. There have been proposals to break up big tech, particularly from, like people like Elizabeth Warren. I think a lot of the reason that those conversations have flatlined is because sort of grand strategists and national security thought leaders recognized that to compete with China, on issues like AI, we needed data, and that these corporations being sort of together and not split apart allowed us to get better data sets to train AI. And so some of those conversations about all the benefits of breaking up big tech kind of just died down. And I tell that story not to go off on a tangent, but to kind of reinforce this idea that there are pros and cons of technologies. But ultimately, if the government comes to believe that a technology is sort of damaging to its sort of domestic status or international stature, that's going to sort of outweigh everything else. It's like concern number one. And so this first basket of conversations that I have with policymakers and that our team does is to sort of first address some of these concerns about like Bitcoin being used to evade sanctions, which is just kind of not really the case, or Bitcoin being used to elicit or sort of to facilitate like ransomware or cybercrime, which has some truth to it. But mostly we try to tell a different story, one that's backed by data and backed by observations about Bitcoin over the past few years. And that story is that, Bitcoin, like the internet, can be a really powerful tool for spreading democratic values. We sort of realized over the last 15 years that giving people access to sort of the freedom of information, the ability to find and post and communicate to anyone anywhere in the world, is this sort of inherently like democratic, like sort of classical liberal value. We saw the Arab Spring in part caused by social media. And while there are sort of drawbacks, and the internet has also been used as a tool to control and surveil, there's a reason the State Department sort of funds the development of internet overseas, because generally we think that the free flow of information is good. So we say the free flow of value is good in that same way. And so we talk about sort of China's CBDC sort of rollout. We talk about sort of people in emerging markets who, like in this letter, so like the authors in this letter, lack alternatives to the existing financial system. And if the choice is between, people across the world where SWIFT is sort of failing. I mean, you see correspondent banking relationships in like Africa and the Middle East and South America down like, 20% over the last 10 years, where people are sort of losing access to the legacy rails of finance. It's far better for America that they join an open, neutral monetary network as opposed to a closed authoritarian monetary network that allows Xi Jinping to internationalize his rule of law. And in the same way that America can sit here in the West and say, well, this transaction that occurred thousands of miles away in another country is illicit finance or terrorism, and because we control the rails of finance, we're going to censor that transaction. There's nothing stopping Xi Jinping from doing the same thing. And so that presents a national security threat to the United States, and one that Bitcoin like very clearly solves. So a lot of conversations happening about national security, energy and the environment, of course. We sent a 10-page sort of research report to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where we kind of first and principally make the argument that a conversation about Bitcoin's negative environmental impacts has to be framed by a discussion of its benefits. Otherwise you're just sort of set up to get a predetermined conclusion. I mean, if you look at the negative externalities of anything in a vacuum, you're never going to like come to any conclusion other than that thing is bad. So you have to start by understanding Bitcoin's social value, like why a world with Bitcoin is better than a world without it. Then you can get into the energy conversation. And there we sort of do an analysis of, what is Bitcoin's actual environmental impact, and sort of conclude by going through the ways in which Bitcoin may actually be quite good for not only the environment, but also the stability of grids and U.S. energy independence. So that was written by two of our sort of climate people at BPI. And then Troy Cross and Margot Pace, shout out to them. And those, I would say, are kind of the two most important conversations that are going on now is Bitcoin's impact on the environment and sort of Bitcoin's impact on the U.S. sort of relative strategic position. So yeah.
Seems like they're keeping you very busy.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot to unpack there. I like, without getting too into the weeds to start, give us just maybe like the surface level of, we see and hear a lot of the FUD that comes out of the mainstream media, and I'm sure this is a lot of what you spend your time on, as you've shared. Bitcoiner's favorite person, Elizabeth Warren, seems to be at the forefront of your mind. I mean, let's just start there. Like, you're talking to Lizzie Warren. What is the first thing that you're finally telling her so she can wrap her mind around the fact that she's an idiot?
Well, I probably wouldn't insult her, for sure. It seems like a bad
Pussy.
strategy. I don't know what I would say to Elizabeth Warren. I think I'd start by having her read this letter, actually. I couldn't think of a better sort of primer for the type of conversation that I would want to have. Um, you know, this idea of sort of convincing like individual politicians about, when someone has kind of branded themselves around a policy issue, I think the probability of them just sort of it's tough to kind of 180 and save face at the same time. It's one thing if you made some negative comments and change your mind, but Elizabeth Warren has positioned herself as a crusader against Bitcoin, and uh, without kind of getting too speculative, there are reasons that I would be pessimistic on face about my or anyone else's ability to get through to her. I think the main thing would be read this letter, and then second is understand that there is a difference between crypto and Bitcoin, and we cannot let conversations that are adjacent to Bitcoin, right? Like whether it's stable coins, risks to the financial system, or whether it's, crypto Ponzi's with like, digital yams that you get like 600% APY on until all your money's gone because it was a Ponzi. Like those are problems. The latter are, and the former is a reasonable conversation to have. But I think that we are kind of on a precipice. And I don't know if I'd say this all to Elizabeth Warren, but just kind of context here. I think that we are on a sort of precipice of deciding and locking in which rights that are sort of de facto because of the legacy world do we take into the world that's like radically changed by technology. And cash is just like the obvious example of that. Like, nowhere do you have a right to cash, but the sort of Constitution was written in a world in which nothing other than cash realistically was conceivable, or something quite like it. And proposals for digital currencies are happening like now and are rolling out now. And I'm really worried about the authoritarian sort of bends of those proposals, and think an insufficient amount of public attention and thought has gone into what sort of principles and technical opportunities and limitations do we bake into a new sort of global monetary network. So yeah, it's just I think it would be, look, this is being used by tens of millions of people across the world, and that's not, you can just read these people tell you their stories. And second is that you need to think about Bitcoin differently, because when I think about our ability to have an open, permissionless, like credibly neutral monetary protocol, which are things that are kind of just, I think, should be important to people. I don't think we have a better shot at it right now than Bitcoin. So yeah, this is useful for real people all over the world, and Bitcoin is not crypto. Those would be the two things I'd try to get across.
So this is interesting because we were talking before you jumped on about this. I made the claim that, when we talk about a two-party system, that really we're kind of operating in a world where there are Democrats and Republicans can basically be said to be kind of the Washington Generals and the Harlem Globetrotters, and then they just switch every 4 to 8 years. And that it's very difficult to engage openly and honestly with these entities like Elizabeth Warren and many others on both sides of the aisle, because really the things that they are saying are not actually representative of what they believe, or effectively communicating kind of why they are representing the things that they're representing. So my question to you is this: like, how do you think about, first of all, do you agree that there is that disconnect, that someone like Elizabeth Warren is never going to engage openly and honestly with this awesome letter that you have helped put together, because really she doesn't care what it says or what the objective truth is. It's about pushing an agenda that she is specifically interested in. So what do you think about kind of that? Do you think that's true? And second, kind of, how do you, if you do, how do you engage with that and operate in a world where that's kind of what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Some people are persuadable, some aren't. But I think that people in the aggregate are persuadable. And I think that some of this you do to try to convince people or educate people on that real individual level. But whether or not Elizabeth Warren is receptive to the truth about Bitcoin, I think her supporters can be. And that's ultimately like what sort of matters here. You can change someone's incentives if you change people's hearts and minds. And I just think that when more people hear stories about Bitcoin that are not just designed to make the reader hate it, which is just like most of the content that people consume about Bitcoin, that process can happen. And so I'm optimistic on public opinion on Bitcoin. I don't really know many people who've spent a meaningful amount of time looking into Bitcoin that have come away from it, at the very least, not like optimistic, and thinking that this is cool and probably good. So yeah, I think over time more people will be pro Bitcoin because people will be, they'll be using it, right? It'll be like being pro TCP/IP. Like no one walks around with like internet protocol bumper stickers on their car. It's just like the backbone of the internet. And so I think if at least my personal prediction plays out, I think there will be a substantial increase in the number of people that are using Bitcoin in their day-to-day lives, whether or not they sort of see it or interact with it. And yeah, I think we have kind of this window basically where no one really knows what's happening, and there are so many sort of reasons to be scared. And you can look to sort of this is the same stuff as like the Clipper debate in like the 90s. Like the sort of early cypherpunks were writing about the same thing. They're talking about crypto, not like cryptocurrencies, but crypto as in cryptography. And it was just really obvious. Like, what are the arguments against it? They're going to say that crypto enables money laundering, financial crime, that it is bad for national security. Like the world is definitely changed by innovations like cryptography and innovations like Bitcoin. It was also changed by innovations like the internet and innovations like the printing press. And some of these innovations fundamentally restructured what distribution of power between a sovereign and a people were sort of possible. It was really easy to censor information when no one could print their own. The Catholic Church in the West controlled all of what was printed and essentially all of what was said and essentially all of what was thought. And then the printing press comes and the genie's just sort of out of the bottle. We adapt and we readjust. And of course, the people that, get the printing press dropped on them when they benefited from people not being able to print their own information weren't too happy about it. But, the anti-printing press moment, didn't last very long because it just made the world better. And so I kind of just look at it on this like long arc of like, we will probably continue to create technologies that fundamentally restructure what distributions of power are possible. And I think technologies that tend toward openness, that tend toward protecting and sort of treating everyone the same, which Bitcoin does. It's the same rules for everyone, and anyone can use it. In the same way that a printing press could be built by anyone and used by anyone, and the internet could be built and used by anyone. So, yeah, I expect the sort of anti-Bitcoin stuff to be short-lived, and who knows how it plays out. There are lots of scenarios. Don't know if we have the time to get into all of that, but yeah, I do expect this stuff to be relatively short-lived. But right now, it's just checking all of these boxes. It's like if you're a policymaker in the United States in 2022 and you hear that something is bad for the environment, that it's threatening our carbon goals, that it's horrible for national security, like yeah, and you kind of maybe believe in confidence that this sort of competes with the dollar. It's kind of a recipe to be like hated by Washington. I don't think it needs to be that way, because I don't think that threat is real. And I don't think the threat is the same as some of the critics think. It will and has restructured what is possible with money. But I don't think that's a negative thing for the United States. I think it is sort of stands in a legacy of innovations that made human flourishing like more readily available, that led to information and speech being more accessible and not controlled. And so I do just see this as like the long arc of like our speech getting freer, and our ability to share our ideas and to interact with each other, regardless of physical proximity, happening more and more. And I think that's just obviously good.
P's muted, so I'm gonna. I mean, to be honest, I want to take the conversation somewhere else. So, P, if you have something else in this line of thought,
No, go for it.
a big part of this conversation we've been having to you, and I say and present this question not as necessarily my opinion or belief, but just to Zell, you can't do that, guy.
I'm so sorry.
This fucking guy. This is not my perspective, not my belief. I just want to, play a little game with you. So a lot of this conversation has been around the importance of Bitcoin, not for Americans, but for, people in developing and countries that need this. What though, like, why would Americans who are very much anti-American interventionism and feel as though American interventionism has caused so many of our problems back here, why do we feel like we need to continue a narrative around this digital, imaginary, fake money that you're saying is important for people in another country, but like we don't necessarily need it? So like, why do we even need to have this conversation? So talk to us about that thought process.
Yeah, it's a really good question. The United States is a policy leader, and other countries around the world look to America when they try to make decisions at home. So the decisions we make here, that our leaders make here, have international implications, often in negative ways. But the main message is that we have a responsibility to set a global precedent. Otherwise, we are responsible for taking away a tool that so many have said is just indispensable in order to sort of carry out their daily lives.
I mean, I've not been convinced to care about Bitcoin as a American whole kidding, obviously. You look so serious right now and angry at me.
No, I'm not. Sorry.
He's furious.
Just kind
on
of
the side,
staring
like, what
off.
the fuck?
Yeah.
Get off Facebook, man.
I'm not on Facebook. I'm just kind of listening.
Let's talk a little bit about, Bitcoin has become a talking point for a lot of politicians. We saw it in the last most recent election. There were a few different Bitcoin or pro Bitcoin politicians running in races. Unfortunately, none of them were able to, I think, win. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Zell. But what are your expectations with the midterms coming up and we have 2024? What role, if any, will Bitcoin have? And I want to first start Bitcoin. And yes, I'm going to say the bad word, so P, you can bleep it out. But what role will crypto also have? Because I feel like the two, unfortunately, will be tied together on the national political stage.
It's a great question. So far, crypto political efforts have far outpaced Bitcoin-specific political efforts. SBF, GMI PAC, there's been sort of millions and millions of dollars committed to political spending. Although it's worth noting that that Sam's political spending is entirely based on candidates' sort of stances on things like pandemic preparedness, and he wants to sort of bring the effective altruism lens to public policy. So I don't know if that counts as crypto political spending, but crypto political spending has far outpaced Bitcoin political spending. It's just a fact. Like the gap is, it was massive. Like I don't even think Erica Rhodes got more than like a Bitcoin like donated to her. Maybe right around that. So what impact will it play on the elections in a bear market? Probably not much. I don't know. I think when Bitcoin is like pumping and you're like a politician and you're like, holy shit, like 40 million Americans own this and they love it because it's made them wealthy. It's like a reason to kind of go to a meeting. It's a reason to talk to people. It's a reason to maybe integrate it into your campaign, particularly if you're someone like, for example, John Ossoff, like in Georgia, I think would be a really reasonable person to like go pro Bitcoin because like he's not going to lose anyone on the left, and he might be able to pick up some like libertarians on the right who would have voted for someone else. So there are these like sort of instances where I think being pro Bitcoin could be like relatively strategic for your campaign, and overall I think like good, but from a tactical perspective. But I don't know what impact sort of Bitcoin is going to have on the midterms. At this point, I would say the biggest impact has been more kind of about the Overton window of Bitcoin. Like it's become a public policy issue. It's become a public policy debate in Washington. So that shift is monumental, though its impact is difficult to assess or foresee. But it is notable that this time around we had people running for the highest elected offices in the United States talking about Bitcoin, whether it was that they loved it or whether it was that they hated it. I also think we saw this cycle, a politicization of Bitcoin that I found like reprehensible, and it's just stupid.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Satoshi said it. Like Satoshi said, all you need to know about this, that Bitcoin's best strategy was just to like stay low key and just like exist. And when or if a sort of escape velocity moment happens, like I think it was inevitable that Bitcoin became a public policy issue. What was not inevitable was that it so quickly became like it started to sort of become a left versus right thing. Tucker Carlson, and it's just like obvious. Like people talk about Bitcoin is bipartisan. Bitcoin is bipartisan. It's not like a magic enchantment. Like if you just say that enough times, it becomes bipartisan. Like that's not how it works. Like the reality is that Bitcoin became politicized. This isn't to say that this isn't to talk about sort of partisan politics. Like it's not the point. But the point is that it's very clear that the Republicans became pro Bitcoin and the Democrats became anti Bitcoin. I think that it'll be interesting to see whether in a bear market, when discussions about Bitcoin maybe start to change in sort of shape and tenor, whether that politicization sticks. Because I think it's just net bad that Bitcoin is partisan. It makes it a bad environment to do Bitcoin things in the United States, to like be a builder or an innovator. If you're having to kind of hold your breath every 4 years to see which party wins, and that sort of shift of the pendulum could fundamentally change your business or put you out of business, why would you be here? And so I think that Bitcoin benefits from exposure to the U.S. capital markets. It benefits from exposure to our rule of law, I think politicization jeopardizes the lives of U.S. Bitcoiners. Like the network will be fine regardless of what happens in the U.S. But I think it threatens Bitcoin users and Bitcoiners when Bitcoin becomes politicized. So those are, I think, were the two kind of most notable things. I would say from the Bitcoin side, it wasn't really campaign finance as much as it was shifting the Overton window, sort of the bounds of dialogue, and unfortunately, sort of sowing the seeds of Bitcoin becoming kind of a one-party issue, which I think is, just not a good outcome.
No, and there's a very interesting thing you've actually brought up that maybe I've just been naive. Thankfully, politics have not been on the forefront of my mind because people like you and
Good.
Grant exist. So thank you for giving me some peace and tranquility in my life, or returning the peace and tranquility to my life. But the idea of like what actually does Bitcoin's role look like in the political sphere in a bear market is actually super, super interesting, because you're right. When the price is pumping, everyone and their mother is talking about it. But when it's down, everyone just wants to like kick us and be like, oh, you do it? I got so many texts over the last week of like, are you alive? Like, I just need to make sure. And deactivating or deleting my Instagram account or the app off my phone and then not being on Instagram, apparently people really thought that I had done something to myself. So I'm alive. I'm okay, guys. Bitcoin's price, I want it to go lower. But I want to now play the inverse of this. So we've seen a lot of, more so on the left, this attack on Bitcoin through an ESG narrative. But do you think those types of attacks and that narrative will continue in a bear market? Or will the bear market also help take some of that negative pressure? And I think pressure is the wrong word I'm choosing, but I'm just going to stick with it. But that negative pressure, negative perspective around Bitcoin, can that dissipate during the bear market if no one's talking about it? Or will it still be a let's kick them while they're down situation, in your opinion?
I think bear markets are where new narratives are born. And I think that bear markets make Bitcoin maximalists, like historically. So for me, the biggest difference in the bear market is I think it's just going to be quieter. And I think that sort of experience of watching Celsius and 3AC and this whole fallout, and who knows how far or wide contagion in the markets like spread. I don't really know. But what I do know is that in times like this, it is much easier to make that second point that I said that I would make to Elizabeth Warren in a hypothetical conversation, which is that it's not to say that everything that isn't Bitcoin is a scam. I don't think that's true. But it's to say that like the overwhelming majority of things that aren't Bitcoin are scams. And it is very important from a policy perspective to recognize that Bitcoin is sort of different enough both in its design and its function and its sort of aspiration that it warrants kind of focused consideration. Like it warrants being sort of separated from everything else. And I don't necessarily mean that like, laws will start like that. That's not necessary. I mean, this stuff's all kind of regulated together, but the conversations around Bitcoin cannot be properly had if they're in the context of conversations about crypto. So yeah, I think it's a good time to make that point because when everything is pumping and you have millions of dollars coming into DC from the VC money and all of this stuff, like I'm sure that being a staffer in the last year since the infrastructure bill has been very interesting hearing like all of these people who are saying Web3 is the future, this is the future, proof of stake is the future, and then oh no, Bitcoin is the future. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think the bear market is going to flush out a lot of excess and a lot of grift, and I think it'll present a clearer picture of this point. So yeah. But yeah, again, I think like campaign financing is unlikely to be kind of a factor from the Bitcoin side. I think it still probably will be and has been from the crypto side of things. So yeah, bear markets make maximalists. Bear markets, yeah. Like I saw someone in the chat said, you get the moon boys who are only here for NGU. Yeah, exactly. Like it's just easier to like talk about Bitcoin when it's quieter. And I think that's true in BC, in DC as well.
Sorry, one thing I want to ask you about is, Putin just gave this speech, I think 5 or 6 days ago, and he said a lot of interesting things that relate to the kind of international monetary policy and have implications for Bitcoin. I wanted to go through some of the highlights from that and sort of get your thoughts. So he talked about the freezing of FX reserves and assets and said the very principles of the global economic systems have taken a blow. Fundamental business notions as business reputation, the inviolability of property, and trust in global currencies have been seriously damaged. He also said, when I spoke at Davos Forum a year and a half ago, I also stressed that the era of a unipolar world order, has come to an end. I want to start with this, as there's no way around it. This era has ended despite all the attempts to maintain and preserve it at all costs.
Yeah, sure, I can comment on that. Sort of two pieces I think immediately worth noting. The first is, it's a difference of opinion, man, about sort of the principles of the monetary order. I mean, yeah, I'm sure if your principles of the monetary order include, you not being the subject to like nation state asset seizure, yeah, it's a violation. But there are people doing the seizing and freezing would say that it's not violating the principles of the global monetary order, or whatever that like word salad is. It's all socially constructed, that's yeah, sure. Of course, Putin is going to say that. Of course, America is going to say the exact opposite. I don't know if there's much use getting into it there. As far as the unipolar world, I would contest that we really have a unipolar world. I think that was more sort of characteristic of like America after World War II. But I think it is fair to say that we're in a multipolar world and have been for some time. Now, I think what he's really sort of referring to is less sort of international like polarity, which is just a made up political science word, like multipolar world, everyone shares power. Bipolar world, think like whatever sort of the Cold War. You got like two big powers and everyone else kind of orbiting around them. And then a multipolar world in which there are relative differences in power, but there's not like one single just dominant force. And I think there's arguments to be made that we're still in a unipolar world. There are arguments to be made that we are in a multipolar world. I think what he's sort of getting at, though, is that what the war in Ukraine has done, and what these sort of sanctions have kind of concretized, is a bifurcation of the international financial system. But this is a story that began a long time ago. It didn't happen overnight. I actually saw someone in the live stream chat like earlier on in the show talking about like BRICS. And I can't remember what that was in reference to, but you have to sort of start there. Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc. There has sort of been the building of parallel institutions to those in the West for quite some time. So I think it was 2012 when China launched the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is essentially just a competitor to the IMF, who for decades sort of stood alone in terms of the it was a monopoly. Like it had a particular it sort of had a particular mission and charter that no one else was fulfilling. Then the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank happens, and they start saying, whereas the IMF had told all of these nations that wanted to get money, you have to jump through, literally, I think the average number of conditionalities to those loans is like 430. So you have to jump through 400 something hoops to get our money. China just started handing out money like for free. No strings attached, basically. Well, strings attached, but not in the same way as sort of the conditionalities on IMF.
Invisible strings.
Well, and so what happened is the average number of IMF loan conditionalities like declined, I think, into like the 30s now. And so essentially, you saw like a monopoly transform into a market where competing institutions were forced to kind of outperform the other in order to fulfill their mission. And I think what Putin is referring to here is a sort of continuation of that trend where we are changing from a world in which the rails of globalization, like finance and the internet, are all held by the West, that new systems that serve the same function are being built by sort of rising, powers or illiberal states, like whatever you sort of basket you want to sort of lump them in. And so you see, sort of alternatives to SWIFT, where sort of China and Russia have been working there. It's not like Russia has really used Bitcoin to evade sanctions so much as it's just used like, gold and like yuan. And so what Putin is pointing out, I think, or hinting at here is true, even though I would kind of laugh at the first part of his statement and, generally, I don't know how true I don't know, it's the semantics there, but his overall point that there's like this decoupling from like a Western monopoly on payment infrastructure and internet, and now a world where we have sort of competing versions of things from like the BRICS nations, that's true. That's just, that's sort of my reaction there. That is a 100% true observation. And it's sort of up for us to decide whether or not, Putin's claim about, sanctions violating this principle of the global monetary order, we collectively as a species determine what those principles are. And I do think that what we are seeing and what we're on the precipice of is kind of a battle between open monetary networks and open networks, permissionless networks, and closed networks, surveilled networks, aggregated, mined, controlled, and censorable networks. I kind of hope that open networks like sort of prevail, and I think they will.
Love it. So I know you have a hard stop in about 5 or 6 minutes. We've asked you a bunch of questions, and I want to give you the opportunity to direct the conversation for a moment. What have we not asked you? What are things that are happening right now in the space that are super important and that people should be thinking about, or that you have been spending a lot of time thinking about?
It's a good question. I'm definitely watching to see just like how the market plays out. I guess it's just more of a curiosity and less interested in, less about Bitcoin, but I am interested to see if there are other insolvencies, and to see, how the kind of crypto market sort of fares for the next few months. But on Bitcoin in particular, some things to be tracking are the White House, sort of the Biden executive order is chugging along. And so we're going to start hearing more about that soon. We're going to start seeing, reports that are written. And I expect, like I mentioned earlier, the sort of two big conversations about, the environment and national security, I think will increase in prevalence in Washington. And those are, I guess, in my line of work, the where I sort of foresee, most of my future time being spent is sort of, overseeing research and having meetings with staffers and sort of working to combat some of the mistruths that are out there, about these two topics.
Love it.
Zell, where can everyone stay up to date with everything you guys are cooking up and working on?
btcpolicy.org, our website, or btcpolicy.org, our Twitter, which is super new. Or you can just probably follow me on Twitter. I tend to tweet about the stuff we're doing.
What's your Twitter address? That's
David Zell _.
David Zell _. Got it.
That's right.
Wait, you're not David _Zell_?
No, I am not.
Fuck, I need to go get that Bitcoin back.
No, I'll send you two, I promise. That was me.
Okay, come on, man. Don't leave me waiting. Guys, if you love anything political, the work that David and his team are doing is vital for, I think, the future of Bitcoin, especially in the political space. Stay up to date with it. Give them a follow. Stay up to date with all their work. David, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We know you are one of the busiest people out there, so keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, guys. Enjoyed it. Take care.
All right. Adios.
And before we cut to a commercial break, I just want to remind everyone, tickets for Bitcoin 2023 are on sale. They go up in 8 days. I fucking begged for this discount code for you assholes. 10% off using the promo code BMLive. Someone please fucking use it. Otherwise, I'm going to look like a jackass.
That's it.
Someone use it. All right, cool. I don't look like a jackass. Awesome. But keep using it because also my entire salary is tied to that alone. So yeah, help me move out of my mom's basement. And then of course, the Bitcoin Magazine print edition censorship resistant issue has made its way to Nashville. It is being boxed, packaged, and going to be mailed out to all of you who have subscribed. So stay tuned for that. The cover was revealed last night via social media. We will in a moment run that ad. So Chris, I hope that you can run that ad because I just promised everyone that. So don't make me be that asshole. But because we have a little bit of time and Pia has no control of what...
I need to start like running a voice changer on you when you do this. That would make it more interesting. Hit it. I will suffer. It's always funny. Let's go.
Honestly,
this is a rendition of War and Peace by our very own Q.
Bitcoin mining in the 22nd century by Haas McCook. I. Greetings from the deep future. It is block height 4,830,001, and we have just had an interplanetary 23rd happening party. It is the year 2100, which by the way is still the 21st century, or as we know it, the year 91 AB, after Bitcoin. Luckily for all of you, time travel has been discovered and I could share the good news with all of you. The first half, dude, what? No, fuck you, Haas. If you would figured out time travel in 2100, I'm coming back and buying Bitcoin. I don't know, but catch the other articles in.
No, that is an amazing article as well. Your renditions as usual.
All right, fine.
I would
I'll
give
finish
them-
this, but I don't buy
I'd give them-
we've invented time travel, and I'm just coming back to tell you about I hate those stories personally.
Yeah, but
I
you hate
them.
everything, dude. We were talking about that. What's the movie that just came out? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And
I
you were
love
like,
that movie.
No, you were like the trope. It's multiverse. We're talking about the multiverse. Everybody's talking about the multiverse. I'm in the film industry. Fuck
It's
the
a
multiverse.
thing that fucking happens every time that there is a blockbuster, like a movie that wins the box office, like crushes it, and then everyone turns around and is like, I need my blank movie. And the blank this time around is multiverse. I'm not saying Everything Everywhere All at Once is a bad movie. I genuinely enjoyed the experience of watching it. The thing that I did not enjoy is just knowing that the reason that movie actually got made was not because it was a very well written story, the cast was phenomenal, director. None of that is the reason it got made. The truth is, it got made because someone in his staff and he was like, I want a multiverse story.
Sorry, I had to try to do that.
Honestly, I hope it worked timing wise, but
It did. I got a new soundboard, everybody, so I'm like just fucking around with it and messing around, and I love unnecessarily bleeping people out. But
all right,
I hear you. I hear you, Q.
Let me finish the intro paragraph and then we'll be done with this dramatic reading.
Then our viewers suffering will be at an end.
I mean, look, we still have a few. We've literally lost half of our viewers, so this is clearly working really well. The first half of the 21st century was beset by financial crises, war, poverty, inequality, environmental destruction, and a COVID-19 pandemic, which caused international rolling lockdowns for over a decade until the collapse of... This is just making me really sad. The global fiat economy necessitated a move away from lockdownism, prolificate spending and inflation, and a return to monetary and economic and hence environmental sustainability. To start, I'll give you a decade by decade look on how we arrived at our happening party. Yeah, that sounds like we are in store for a lot of shitty decades to come. But if you want to hear the whole story,
Well said.
you can check out the whole story in the Moon Mag, which will officially be last quarter's issue as of next week. So get it while supplies last. And if you're not subscribed to the print mag, do it, because otherwise you're just dumb. I know you're gonna have to keep hearing my dramatic readings.
Well, that's going to happen regardless, apparently, despite what I would like. But also, this is tongue in cheek. It really is a fantastic publication. The new one, as Q said, on censorship is incredible. It focuses on. It was inspired by the Canadian trucker protest and the extreme actions that the government of Canada has taken to try to block people from funding using their own money, which I would argue you should be able to use however you want. It's something that you earned, you own it, to support the Canadian truckers, which were protesting by not delivering their routes. And the government stepped in and said, you can't do that. You can't fund these things. And they took a lot of donations through Bitcoin. So it's a really, really interesting story. And it is yet another example of, as we proceed further and further into this, this weird, somewhat dystopian future as it plays out in front of us. We're going to see more and more stories like this, where governments that are traditionally identified as like Western and freedom-loving are taking these more and more overt actions against their people. And we're going to see more and more of that. So the edition goes through that, tells a number of different stories related to it. And some of the best, authors in the space have contributed to it. So on that note, let's go to commercial. We'll come back. Hopefully Jimmy Song, who is one of those amazing authors, will be ready to go. And if not, you'll get to hear Q and I talking more about Bitcoin.
Oh, also, my bad, you're not going to see the commercial for the new print mag because Chris fucked up. I'm kidding. I love you, Chris.
Let's hit it. Roll tape.
Thank you for sticking around through those commercial breaks. We hope you enjoyed the exclusive look at how the print mag is actually made. But now it's time for another Bitcoin song sheet with Jimmy Song. How goes it, Jimmy?
It's going well, guys. How are you?
Doing well, man. Thank you for joining us. We know you're off gallivanting around the world and spreading the good word of Bitcoin. I saw some pictures circulating of you maybe giving a talk recently. I'd love to just maybe hear from you what you're seeing on the roads. What are the conversations you're having? What's the general sentiment from the people you're having conversations with?
Yeah, so I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee right now, and I spoke at the Chattanooga Bitcoin meetup. It was their first one, and it was awesome. It was like 120 people in Chattanooga. I didn't know much about this town, to be honest, but yeah, a lot of people are very interested. There's a lot of momentum around Bitcoin. I mean, like, despite the bear market and everything else, there's a lot of a lot of Bitcoiners that are interested in building that, a lot of curious people that are looking at inflation numbers and saying, hey, I really need to learn about this stuff because I don't want to get caught again, sort of like napping. So it's interesting, just how and Chattanooga is not exactly like a really big city or anything like that, but it there's a lot of interest here. It's very much aligned, I think, with those of Bitcoin. Certainly a lot more libertarian than say some city in the Northeast or something like that. So I've been pleasantly surprised. It's a wonderful town, and reminds me a lot of Austin.
I'd love to hear that. And I'm going to ask kind of a dick
Can't
question.
believe I had my hat on back.
Hey, man, honestly, I wouldn't have known if you didn't say anything. So hat on backwards. I'm always fascinated by some of the conversations you have with people early in their discovery of Bitcoin, and just like an estimate of how many times have people asked you about crypto or just other altcoins that you've had to revert them or correct course.
I mean, I've been doing that forever. It feels like, and at least when I'm wearing the hat, I'm talking about that at least once or twice a day. And at conference like 30 or 40. So
let me rephrase. Has the bear market as a whole changed the frequency of people asking about just crypto en masse, or is it now turned into like, hey, since everything's gone to the shitter, let me just focus on the best of the best?
Yeah, I would say that they're learning on their own, certainly a lot more than they were before. So, I think getting wrecked will help you sort of, question some of your life choices or whatever. And that's definitely happening. And I do see that. I think, for a lot of the people coming to these meetups, though, it's very genuine. In bear markets, you get all of the people that are actually, dedicated towards Bitcoin and not, not trying to figure out which one's the best one to buy or something like that. They the narrative, and you get a pure signal from those people. I think a lot of the people that got wrecked won't come back, but the people that stay, I think they'll be at least way more in Bitcoin going forward. And I'm just seeing that in a lot of places. I do go on like more, on shows where they promote more altcoins or whatever and debate with them. And I've noticed a significantly larger percentage of people that are saying, hey, like, I get it. I'm starting to come around to your position.
It's an exciting thing to hear, but also when you, I think, have the context of what's going on with the economy and the world and what's, I think, forcing people's hands into this situation, it's a little troubling. I want to present a question to you that I presented to P and to Chris at the beginning of the show. We saw Jerome Powell give his, like, you can call it a speech. I call it a little talk around instead of a walk around. He was just talking around everything. And one of the things, he continued to hammer on was the idea that, inflation, we're going to be wrong. It's not going to be transitory. Now we have this issue of what is actually causing the inflation. Powell will never say that his work has caused it. But I wonder in your little witch's brew of supply chain issues and some quantitative easing and some quantitative tightening and anything else that you think fits into this pot that has led to the inflation we see, what is sort of the blend, in your opinion, that has led to this? Is it like 25% supply chain issues, 75% all the quantitative easing and tightening the Fed has been doing? Is it 60% supply chains, 40% Fed work? Talk to us a little bit about what you think is causing this inflation in just your opinion. None of us here are actual economists.
Well, I mean, and the actual economists are completely wrong all the time. So I would say I think the quote that comes to mind is inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. And it is a monetary phenomenon. The main cause is monetary expansion of the Federal Reserve. Sometimes that could be offset by additional demand coming from all over the place, and you sometimes have that, especially with dollar as the reserve currency and so on. But this notion that it's greedy corporation and anything else that's actually causing this is ridiculous. I mean, like one of the things you pointed out was supply chain disruptions. That's caused almost directly by inflation. Because think about what happens. You expand the money supply. There's more money chasing the same amount of goods. So everywhere up and down the supply chain, you have these goods, like half-finished goods and things like that you have to buy as part of, your part of the supply chain. You get some inputs and you take outputs. If the inputs cost more, then you can't make profit selling at the same price. So the prices rise all along the supply chain. So what happens? Well, if you're one of the customers, you're not going to be happy about a price rise because you were planning on the price staying the same. So, you're going to say, I don't know if I want to do that. Like, let's end this contract and I'll see if I can find something else. This is what a supply chain disruption is. You have people that are raising prices, and you have customers that aren't happy about it, so they go look for something else. And prices do rise. I think eventually, each company along the supply chain recognizes that, okay, well, I'm going to have to accept the reality that prices are going up, and they just charge more on their end, and then their customers end up upset, and you begin the whole cycle again. It's a normal part of inflation. Whenever you have inflation, you're going to get supply chain disruptions. It's not anything to do with, there was a ship stuck in the Suez Canal for a few weeks. I mean, that might have affected a few things. But ultimately, the real reason is monetary expansion. You have price signals that are not communicating properly. You have people that planned on the previous price that are having to adjust everything. And this is, all the plans that everyone makes has to get kind of rejiggered. And that's what a supply chain disruption is. So I don't, like blaming it on greedy corporations or whatever, it's all the same thing. It's all inflation. It's all monetary expansion. It's, stuff that people couldn't prepare for, and therefore it's affecting everything else.
I don't want to keep going down this path because I do actually want to talk a little bit about, the virtue signaling and the fiat morality, because we've seen a lot of it. We'll dive into the attack that you had on my hair that I won't stand for. But we'll start first. Just, I know we're going to do this part at the end, but I want to just bring one of the 10 fiat moral rules that you threw out. And it was like the injecting Pfizer's latest product in your body being the socially responsibility thing to do. And, well, like, I know you said this almost in jest of what they'll inevitably do to us, but this is what has already happened. And just maybe like paint this picture of what is the fiat morality that you are seeing come to life.
Yeah, I think traditional morality was based on natural law, right? Like stuff that you can reason out pretty easily. Okay, you shouldn't steal, so therefore you shouldn't do these things like, go into someone's house, take their stuff without them knowing, and return it, right? Like that. You shouldn't go and promise things that you can't deliver. That's all fraud. It's stuff like that. It's fairly easy to. Well, not necessarily, but it's reason. It's something that you can reason out. Fiat morality is almost always put from the top down, and their reasoning is sort of like given to you, and it's forced on you, and you're not really allowed to see the other side of the issue. So, like the latest one I can think of is like this Ukrainian flag thing, and it's like you have to go and display it and show your support for Ukraine because obviously it's the most important issue at the moment or something like that. And there's a lot of those kinds of things that have come into the consciousness of the American public for the last 100 years or so. And I point out in the article, traditionally it was used to get people to support war, and show that okay, it's the righteous thing to do because everyone needs some justification for war. But it's spread to all sorts of things at this point, where if you're not using pronouns or whatever, then you're a complete bigot and you need to be tossed in prison or something like that. Like, I think there's actually a dad that refused to call his son like a she because, like it's a 12-year-old and apparently he has to call him a she because even though it's his own son and he never agreed to it because that's what the Canadian government forces. Like it's stuff like that where there's some agenda at play. And we are sort of being told morals rather than reasoning about it. And I think reasoning about it will get you much better moral rules. The reason why the most horrible governments in history are considered horrible is because by natural law, it's pretty obvious that they did badly. So you look at like Stalin's Russia or something like that. And you see that they killed like 60 million people. We go, all right, that was obviously an evil government because they killed a lot of people without any due process, any sort of like rights, and they got arrested for, like without knowing what the charges against them were, and they would be frozen to death and treated inhumanely. And these are all value judgments that we can make based on reason, on common natural law, like on things that we sort of have inside ourselves instead of having them handed down to us. That was sort of Stalin's point, was like morality is what I say it is, and that's the path to tyranny. That's how you get an entire you enslave an entire nation towards the whims of a single person. So that's what fiat morality is. And my article was basically pointing out when you have fiat money, you go down this path of essentially socialism / communism, where the people become the playthings of the elite, the people in charge, rather than the people in charge trying to secure natural law for everybody else.
So there's a couple of thoughts that I have. Part of the way that I guess I would start by saying the idea of natural law is a little bit anathema to me, because I think that we can see so many examples in nature. You in the article you mention sort of the things that North Korea is doing as being something that we can deduce from first principles is bad because of sort of a natural law argument. And I guess for me, I think that there are so many things that happen in nature that would kind of run counter to the kind of like natural law argument, that it's hard for me to kind of anchor into that. Nature is vicious and messy and violent, and you can see that in so many different organisms and ecosystems. And so the idea that there is a kind of natural fundamental set of morals that can be that all humans kind of follow, I think is becomes I don't want to say problematic, but it's hard to kind of for me to anchor into. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I get that, but that's kind of confusing the word nature. It means lots of different things.
Yeah,
Natural
absolutely.
law doesn't mean it's like what you're talking about is nature, like animal kingdom nature. And okay, well, it acts this way, therefore, there is no such thing as commonality, or this idea that you shouldn't steal other stuff. It's right for some people and it's not for others, or something like that. I reject that kind of argument, because if you don't have some sort of like common morality, then none of this works. That if it's all relative, then nobody's is better than anybody else, and it's complete chaos, and you get nothing. And that it's easier for me to believe in something like natural law because I'm a Christian, and for other people, that tends to be the part that they stumble over, because if you believe in natural law, you have to justify where it comes from. And Austrian thinkers have spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to justify that. And there's a lot in Mises and Hoppe and even Rothbard talking about how to justify natural law. Like, okay, where do these principles come from? Why should we respect other people's property rights and so on? And they make these very I would say like esoteric arguments, and I don't really buy them. They're based on stuff like, okay, you have possession of your own self. The fact that we're arguing means that you have to assume that the other person is actually in possession of their own self, and that's therefore something that you implicitly already respect, and therefore you can derive property rights and so on. I don't buy that argument. I think that's a much harder road to go down, and that's I think maybe what you're reacting to, trying to come up with first principles that will get you to the point where you respect other people's property rights, including their right to liberty, life, and property, and all kinds of stuff like that. So I get this like bootstrapping difficulty. For me, it's much easier because as my shirt says, I think you can see it. God, it says God, family, country, Bitcoin. By the way, if you believe that God exists, then all of this is obvious. It's natural law is what God laid down, and that's it. And you have a bootstrap into these moral rules. The thing is, like, when you have the state determine these things, then the state ends up being God, and they get to determine everything. And that is much, much worse. What you get is the Holocaust. What you get is 60 million people dying in the gulag. It's, what you get is the Great Leap Forward, and, tens of millions of people dying in a famine. Like that's what you get when you don't have some form of natural law. So you can't, if you're going to abandon natural law, well, you have to have some justification for it, without some of these very obvious moral evils that you get from these other systems. And I mean, there have been other sort of like attempts at it with humanism and stuff like that. But again, like from a philosophy standpoint, I don't think they hold up to any scrutiny.
It's interesting. I won't pretend to have spent much time, kind of examining kind of the intersections of natural law and religion and how they relate, and sort of the history of and study of human morality. But I will say briefly, I studied, biology and the human brain in part of my undergrad, and I think that there is actually some really interesting primary research that's been done on, altruism in multiple species, right? And it's some of my professors would absolutely hate me right now, because the first thing they say is like, you're like, oh, see, we see this behavior in animals, so does it apply to humans? And they'd be like, no, it never applies. We're talking about animals, not humans. But there's these studies around, for example, in bats, they display these really interesting, apparently kind of contradictory altruistic behaviors that people didn't really understand for a while. And you sort of build out these models of like how this could apply to other organisms, but again, never humans. But in bats, you see, they will help each other give birth and stuff like that. And it's because it benefits the colony. So you have these selection pressures that actually, I would argue, can can lead to maybe what you refer to when you talk about natural law, even in an environment for me where I don't think it necessarily comes from, a God who is like, bestowing them. So it's something I need to think about a little bit more, because you do also, in contradiction to the first thing I said, where like, oh, nature can be violent and all this stuff, you actually do see, especially in mammals and a lot of primates, these behaviors where they sort of go out of their way or at risk to themselves in order to help each other. And I think the sort of like biological argument for that would be that you have these selection pressures, which drive towards these kind of, tribes and groups of organisms that are altruistic and helping each other. But that's a messy thing to go down. I wonder, if you don't mind, I'd like to shift slightly and talk about, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say that that's a common sort of thing for a lot of people to go down.
You're like,
And,
it's
you're kind of forced on that if you deny the reality of God, because essentially animals are sort of like the precursors to man, according to sort of that philosophy.
Mhm.
I've never found them very convincing. And I imagine that that's probably why you don't find it very convincing. And despite some sort of commonalities, yeah, there are animals that are more altruistic and all that. I don't think they're human. I don't think they're close to human. I don't think they have anywhere near the capacities that humans have. And there are sort of extraordinary things about humanity that you kind of have to come to grips with and say, okay, well, can we derive our morals from studying, sort of like lower life forms? I really don't think that's really going to lead anywhere. I mean, I don't know. Right? Like there are people that do attempt to go down that route too. But I've never really found anything convincing. Just like sort of like the Austrian argument for, why we should have property rights. It's based on assumptions you're making already, and therefore like none of it, it's all meaningless unless you accept those assumptions. That sort of thing. That's not very convincing to me either. So, like the only thing that's made sense to me is the Christian worldview. It's that God exists, and these are the moral laws that He laid down. We call them natural law. These are kind of like the laws of physics, except in the moral sphere. Except humans have this capacity to violate them if they so choose. So, I mean that's a very very Christian worldview, but that's what makes sense to me, and not this other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, wait, hang on.
Wait, I just want to jump in real quick, Q, and then I do want to say I do actually find I think this is a super interesting conversation. I hope you're okay, having it, because I think we've had.
Oh, I love this conversation. Keep going. Yeah, do it.
Yeah, and I think it does relate, or it can be related back to Bitcoin, which is super fascinating. But I do just want to jump in and say I do actually find the behavioral ecology and animal behavior models, there are lots of holes because there hasn't been enough research done, but I do actually find them super convincing personally. I think that there are these, not in terms of complex human interactions, but I do think that there are these systems that we can see that can be used to kind of understand how things might have, why humans might display certain behaviors. Even though, again, behavioral ecologists would burn me at the stake for saying that. So I actually find the world an incredibly amazing, fascinating place. And the idea that in my view, the systems that we operate in and the way that humans interact, in my, biased worldview, I think it's even more amazing that, in my view, they developed kind of out of randomness. So to me, it's like the world is this incredibly fascinating and remarkable place, because even if I don't understand exactly how we ended up here, I don't believe in a higher power. And so to me, that it's almost more magical. But I just wanted to say that. Q, you had something you wanted to jump in, and then Jimmy, feel free to
Finally,
tell
please
me I'm
stop
an idiot.
talking. Jesus, took him long enough.
Hey,
I mean, so
you know what you get.
I disagree with both of you. I don't believe in God per se, but I do believe in a higher power. I want to present this question to you, Jimmy, though, because I do agree that we are running into this issue of a lot of virtue signaling and this morality police, if you will, of, well, if you don't believe this, you're a bad guy. If you believe this, you're a bad guy, and so on and so forth. Quite frankly, I think a lot of it is rooted in our politics and our political system just being turned into a B scenario has made our minds think everything is A-B and not realizing, no, life is this fucking spectrum. My question to you, Jimmy, is if you are so absolute in believing what you believe and you think everyone should believe these things, how is that any different than the morality police on the other side who believe that what they believe is the right thing and that everyone should believe what they believe?
Yeah, great question. And my answer would be I don't want to force anyone to do anything. I'm a libertarian at heart. If you don't want to believe in God, that's your choice. I'm not gonna go and force you to attend church. I wouldn't do that. And anyone that knows me, I think, knows that I wouldn't do that. But if you're curious, I'm happy to take you to church with me, and have you understand my point of view. The difference between, I think, my perspective and sort of the virtue signaling fiat morality that I wrote about is those people want to force you, right? Like they want you to and do all these things. And if you don't do them, that you're somehow less than human or in violation or something like that. And I think my perspective is completely consistent with Christianity because, if you do come into sort of like this reality of does God exist and so on, well, the question you kind of have to ask yourself is then why doesn't he make me worship him or something like that? Well, I believe that's because he gave us free will, right? Like he gives us a choice. And if that's the case, I should at least have the same courtesy to other human beings. If he's giving me the choice, then PQ, I'm going to give you the choice too. I'm not going to force anything. And hey, if you're curious, I would, and kind of like this conversation right now, I'm happy to explain my position and tell you what I find convincing. I consider myself a pretty technical person and pretty logical person. It's like none of what I believe, I think, is based on fairies or something like that, which is sort of like the caricature a lot of atheists have of Christians. I think what I believe is perfectly reasonable, and I'm happy to explain that. But it's kind of like Bitcoin, right? Like I'm not going to force you to go and buy Bitcoin. I have Bitcoin. If you're curious about it, come talk to me. Yeah, I'm happy doing that, but I'm not going to go and force everybody to use it. And that's the difference, is that with the US dollar, you are forced to use it through legal tender laws and so on. With fiat morality, you are forced to go and agree with whatever it is that the elites say. With Bitcoin, you're not forced. It's completely voluntary. With Christianity, and at least my code of ethics and morals, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You do it completely voluntarily. That's the difference.
Yeah.
So there's something to unpack there that I think is super, super important. And it is within these subsets of groups, there are further subsets where, while Jimmy, you may say, I'm not going to force my beliefs on you. Unfortunately, there are other Christians who very much want to force their beliefs on others. No different than the morality police who want to force what they believe is morally right and just onto other people, while there are others who may believe and align with some of these things and may do them themselves. They also just don't give a fuck if you do it yourself. Like, I'll put myself on the spotlight. I'll probably get canceled after I admit this. I'm vaccinated. I'm single vaxxed. I also live with my parents of a certain age, and part of the conversation we had as a family was, given how much I travel, given my exposure to just randos on the streets, probably in the family's best interest if I were to get vaccinated. But that was my choice that I came up with. Not because the government told me to, not because of anything else. Me and my family made that decision. Do I think I now need to go tell my neighbors they need to do that? Fuck no. Do I need to tell someone to wear a mask when they walk into a store, go onto an airplane? Absolutely not. But yet, for some reason, people still feel the need to tell me these things. So that is, I think, the perfect example of that middle ground where you can have your own belief system. You can. But the moment that you think your beliefs are better than others, that's where we've lost the plot. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people in positions of power and influence who think or believe that the reason they got there is because of their morals and their beliefs. And as a result, they should be forcing it onto other people. But unfortunately, like 99.999999% of you are not Martin Luther King Jr., but you think you are, and you think that you're worth, every word you say is worth everyone's ears and everyone should do it. That's my mini rant.
Well, let me push back just a little bit, because I think the vast majority of what at least Christians that I know, they are not saying, if you're not Christian, we're going to fire you. There's nobody saying that, but tons of people saying, if you're not vaccinated, we will fire you. Right? That's the difference. That's the difference. And if you just look at the behavior, and you know, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that that's been the case like all throughout Christian history or whatever. There's been plenty of very bad representatives of Christ that have said, you know, if you either turn Christian or we will kill you, right? Like that's happened before. I will say though that Christianity has been the least offensive in that regard throughout history, if you actually go and study it. But you know, like stuff like vaccines, or you know, if you don't you know, condemn these revolutionaries as being guilty or something like that, we will kill you. I mean, the playbook of the tyrant of honestly a lot of communist countries and socialist countries has been, if you don't do this, we will, you know, use force on you. And that's way worse with a morality that's based on the state is always right than one that is based on, okay, here is natural law given to us by God. And here are things, you know, like even the dignity of every human being is a Christian concept. The whole concept of human rights is a Christian concept. And it comes from the fact, or comes from the idea that every person is made in the image of God. Like that's not necessarily something any other culture really had. Any other religion before that really had. You know, most of them were, you know what, like, you know, these people are superior because they believe in this. These other people, you know, we can just go kill willy-nilly because, you know, they're not part of the special group, or like they like I think you have to recognize that there are some sort of codes of ethics that are better than others. And if you are sort of like communist and you believe that the state knows all and that they are, you know, they reign supreme, that is a way worse morality than something that's based on natural law. And there's sort of like a false equivocation oftentimes between those, and saying, oh, you know, everything, you know, it's right sometimes and not others or whatever. And there's all this slander about Christianity, about how evil it was, when really like the things that people come up with about like, you know, how horrible Christianity was, like come from like 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And it's like, dude, we can point to stuff that's happening right now from this sort of like woke, you know, godless like culture of you know, fiat morality that's happening on a daily basis. That's clearly worse, at least in my opinion.
I think that I also want to acknowledge, like, there are fucking awful things that have been done in the name of like science and progress and stuff like that. I mean, you just look back through the history of even this country, and it's like, you know, forced sterilizations, Tuskegee Airmen, all sorts of crazy shit. So I think that we can all agree that basically like forcing people to fit within one's concept of morality, broadly speaking, can cause a lot of problems. And I think one thing I want to do is I want to shift back to your article, because I think we spent a lot of time talking about kind of the idea of natural law and the implications for, you know, Christianity. But I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. And we've got about, you know, 15, 20 minutes left. So if it's okay with you, Jimmy and Q, I'd love to shift over and focus on some of that.
I mean, it's not, but go for it.
All right, love it. We're doing it. So one thing that I thought was so interesting is that you focused the conversation around kind of the idea that there are the elites and that they are kind of pushing these narratives on people. And I by the way, I completely agree with you about woke politics. I cannot stand that shit. Like it is so toxic. And it, as you say in this article, it's really, really hard to stand up to it because it's like I don't know what the right word is, but I mean, basically, in many cases, it comes from a good intention, or I would like to think that it does, but it ends up being turned into basically propaganda that is used to force specific behaviors by large groups of people. And you reference the idea that it's kind of like people don't stand up to it because it's like there's a bully on the playground, and if you stand up, you're going to get hit. And but here's my question for you. You focus on the idea that these ideas are coming from like the quote unquote elites. And I kind of think of it, instead of it being like we have to tear down these the elites, I think of it more as being about the incentive structures that are in place. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think the interplay is between this idea that there's like a small group of elites that are trying to create these narratives and forcing them down versus these being kind of emergent behaviors and things that happen given the kind of systems that are in place? So rather than attacking the individuals, it's kind of like, do we need to fix the systems more? What do you think the kind of interplay between those two ideas is? If that makes sense.
And they're very related, right? Like this is I pointed this out in the article. Like a lot of it comes from the people that are rent seeking, right? Like their positions, they want more power. They're playing a lot of politics, and these rent seeking positions are obviously coming from the excess money printing, and they're not really doing anything. And this is what they trip themselves over is sort of gaining more power, and these sort of arbitrary rules like give them more influence and power and so on. And that in itself has its own momentum, and that's maybe not something that I wrote about in the article, but I think it's true. There's almost like there's an industrial complex around all of these things that has its own momentum and continues to just sort of like roll on without anyone necessarily driving it. And I think that's what you're alluding to with the incentive system that's there, and maybe that's to blame. I think there's certainly some truth in that, but mostly I think there's people that want to change something about the sort of like they want to modify natural law so they can like get away with something. So war and like doing violence sort of like without justification is definitely against natural law. I think you're not supposed to punch somebody in the face without even if they provoke you to some degree. Like it's you need to have a really good reason to punch somebody in the face. And that's like war. That times like 100 is like what war is. But a lot of governments want to justify going to war. They want to justify gaining more power at an international scale. So they will come up with reasons, right? Like going into Iraq, it was weapons of mass destruction or whatever, and it sounded good at the time, right? It's like, you saw Colin Powell's presentation at the UN. Oh, yeah, those trucks, did disappear. What's going on, But that's what the elites kind of wanted to get away with at the time, was they wanted to justify something that they already wanted to do, probably for other reasons, like that they didn't want to reveal. And we found out later that, they were getting a lot of pressure from, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they needed to do something. There's a lot of different sort of forces at play that they'd rather not admit to. So they come up with these other justifications to not sound or look as scummy. And that's where a lot of this comes from, is people that want to get away with stuff. And they push these narratives as a way to sort of get away with it, and it kind of works. The whole Ukrainian flag thing. How many people are asking about Hunter Biden's laptop, with regard to Ukraine or anything like that right now? Not too many people. But he was an executive for a Ukrainian energy company. Doesn't think that has any relevance to why they're pushing the Ukrainian narrative so hard, or all the financial sanctions that are happening. They want to get away with something. That's ultimately it, and they know it's wrong, so they have to come up with some other sort of more narrative around it, and that seems to be pretty effective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I feel like it always comes back to the systems that are in place. And I think in your articles, you talk a lot about kind of like the fiat money printer being that thing. And I think I agree with you on so much of it. I just feel like and I think you're asking all the right questions. I feel like if we don't focus on kind of the systems in place that got us here, which I think we both agree is kind of like the money printer and the fiat systems that are there, we'll just sort of see the same systems over, or the same outcomes again and again and again. And I think we both agree it's like Bitcoin starts to solve that problem because it fixes those incentives. If you don't have these systems that can be taken advantage of to push individual narratives and individual goals, if those start to be subverted by alternative systems like Bitcoin, it opens the door for a much more just and fair world. I don't know. Q, what do you
that's
think?
the principle under which the U.S. was founded, right? It was to protect national wants, right there in the Declaration of Independence. But since the creation of the Fed, I think we've gone way far from that, and it's way too than we're ready to admit, because we're seeing the same behaviors that got communism, that characterized communism in our society, and that's really scary.
Yeah.
We live in a socialist country. Let's be very clear about that. We just have shitty socialism. Corporations get the bailouts instead of
exactly.
People.
It's so bad.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. There's so many rabbit holes I want to go down. And full transparency, definitely still a little feeling the effects of my events from last night. But I have a different theory on Ukraine, and it is just the simple fact that we were out of a war, and the opportunity to enter a war presented itself. And while there have been natural disasters happening all over the Middle East, Syria has been in a terrible crisis this entire time. You have now an earthquake in Afghanistan that has left thousands upon thousands of families in a worse situation than they were in even when the Taliban took over after we fucked over that country. I can give you a laundry list. But those are not the things that are trending. And we brought this up as well when we talked about mass shootings, and the idea that there was a different quote unquote mass shooting 2 days before the Uvalde one, but that one didn't garner national attention because it didn't pull on the heartstrings enough. And the one that made its way around the country was the one that was going to make and garner the most and the strongest emotional reaction from us. And I think that's what we see is we almost have to pay attention to the stories that aren't being told to us, because I think that helps give you a better signal of what's really going on in the world. The incentive for Ukraine, while there could be some tie-in with Hunter Biden, there's a reason why companies like Raytheon are pumping over the last 3 months. There's a reason why you continue to see money get sent to Ukraine. This is a country that, once we became the global reserve currency, was founded on the idea that war is a profitable act because World War II was so profitable for us. So let's continue to rinse and repeat the cycle. That's all we're seeing, is just the new war that we need to fight, because based on economic history in this country, that has led to growth and prosperity. That's just my mini rant. That's
Yeah,
where my head is at.
I would agree that there's a lot of different incentives for war, and defense contractors and a lot of the grift that goes on during war. I was talking to somebody that came back from Afghanistan, and he was saying how so much of it was grift, right? Like we were spending so much money in Afghanistan during like our 20-year occupation there, and every month, it was just grift after grift, right? Like, we're spending this money to train these, Afghans on this weapon system or something like that. None of that was happening. It was companies that were pretending to do that and taking the money and running, and like basically getting subsidized, right? Like that sort of thing happens a lot. There's a lot of opportunity for rent seeking in any kind of war, and I agree that that's like a major consideration whenever anyone is thinking about war, because hey, we can get away with a lot more stuff. And, nobody really cares about what's going on in the back end while a war is going on, because everyone's focus is on the war. But that's just one aspect of it, right? Like, and there's a lot of other things where they want to get away with lots of stuff, and they push a lot of these narratives. Like, I have no doubt that a lot of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, and like they're on their way to trying to make that seem not so bad, and I think it's like, it might shock us today to say that, but just watch like 20, 30 years from now. Deeply embedded morals like that, they take a really long time, but they're working on it. It's probably at first going to be like something like incest, and later, the consent age of children and stuff like that. But it's on its way. I think they want to get away with stuff like that. So they're working towards changing the morals so that they can get away with it. That's the playbook. It's really, they have these desires to do illicit things, or things that are against natural law, and they don't like it, so they're trying to figure out ways to go do it.
I mean, we're also bearing witness at this present moment. You're seeing the vaccine now getting rolled out for 5-year-olds or kids under 5. This is just going to be more and more of a mess. But maybe this is an idea to leave you, Jimmy, thinking, and to leave others thinking. But I've been personally trying to read it and learn more about history. I have a long journey to go. But it seems to me the largest issue, the actual largest issue with every single system, from communism to capitalism and everything in between, is complacency. That is the root of the issue. It's not actually the system, but it's the people involved in the system becoming complacent, and in turn just continuing to do things because, well, that's the way we did it. I didn't fuck things up before, so like, why would we fuck it up, without having a clear and defined understanding of, we made these decisions for these reasons in the past, and those reasons or incentives do not align with the present or the future. And I think that complacency leads to the demise of every great civilization. And we're bearing witness to complacency in America.
I think you could say something like, weak men create hard times, and yeah,
something like that famous quote.
Hard times.
Yeah.
Before we
Lead
wrap
us
up,
to-
Jimmy, I have to come at you for something, because I'm telling you right now, especially if you, and I mean this in the utmost respectful way, but especially if someone like you with no fucking hair on their head tells me that I have to wear a hairnet, it's like a fat person telling me to put on a mask. Go to the fucking gym before you tell other people what to do. All right, I'm definitely getting canceled today.
God, no, Yeah, I got to side with well, not on the sentiment, but man, I would kill for hair like Q's. My hair is bullshit. My hair is a shitcoin. That's the end of my
I was
contribution
just
to the
making
conversation.
up
You're
stuff
welcome.
that I thought would be,
But, like, it's so accurate,
analogous
Jimmy.
to sort of like what's going on.
Like how?
Wait. What
a
is the
school-
context for this though, Q?
at
Where
the end of
did
his-
Jimmy Song
okay, so-
insult you and your
So
family and your people?
P is now admitting live on air that he did not do the homework for his job. I want that on record. P did not read the article ahead of this interview. At the very end of the article, point number 2, 10 Fiat moral rules soon to come. Wearing hairnets is necessary to prevent the spread of lice. Like, this definitely is a thing that some schools do.
Wait,
like-
what?
They do.
Wait. No,
It's,
wait.
It's something they already do. I made that up.
Dude, I've definitely heard stories of like schools telling kids like you have like there's a lice outbreak, like everyone do something, like everyone has to wear hats now or some shit.
Wait. Jimmy is coming down on your side here. He's saying that's
No,
bullshit.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is if Jimmy Song with his beautiful, beautiful head were to say to me with my beautiful, beautiful hair,
Oh, okay.
it's like getting a haircut from a bald barber, man. Like I don't take hair advice from people.
He's not
that have
saying
hair.
that. He's saying that would be bullshit. Jimmy, I should have come to your defense here. I misunderstood the entire premise of this part of the conversation. Dude, Q, get fucked, man. He's saying that is bull. Wait, he went off camera, Jesus.
I'm not off camera. Chris just kicked me off screen.
Oh, I love it.
Chris is abusing his producer privileges
No,
today.
it's so good. It's so good. It's got to be spicy. Yeah, Jimmy's on your side, Q. And now I feel attacked. As someone who does not have as nice hair as you do, I feel like I have to take the opposite side of the conversation.
Hey, it's coming. At some point it'll be you can't like where's it? What's that story? It's like a sci-fi story. I think it was written by
Oh, I know exactly which one you're
Ayn
talking
Rand
about.
or something like that. The one where like everyone's equal and no one dances
Yes,
better
they
than
have to
anyone
like
else or
they
whatever.
have to wear
Yeah.
handicaps.
I mean that's the world that like honestly a lot of people would be way more satisfied with because they'd rather have that than anything extraordinary. But that's that's where we're going.
Yeah. I think that I'm more optimistic. I think that the systems that are in place will kind of start to break before we fully get to that world. But I think that it goes back to the systems, man. I think, it's not the individuals who want that thing. It's the systems that are in place. They basically force everyone into a box where they feel like their only option is to handicap others rather than, embracing the things that make them amazing or acknowledging the things that make others amazing. I just feel like it's all about the systems. As you would say, it's the fiat systems. They fuck everything up. Bitcoin is the answer.
Yeah, that was the point of my article. I think you summed it up well. I mean, all of my articles actually. You just ruined it for everybody.
Spoiler alert.
Jimmy, let's give you the final word to plug whatever your heart desires to plug.
Well, so we've been talking a lot about morality and natural law and things like that, and I've written quite a topic the last few years. And this, if you're curious about this particular article, there's a lot more out there. But I would put this question to everyone listening to this thing, which is where do your morals come from? Like how do you justify your behavior or what you believe to be good behavior? And if you can't really answer that, you need to figure out ways to dive deep into that, because if you don't know why property rights are important, well, that's going to have consequences for how you view Bitcoin and everything else, because really Bitcoin is all about property rights, and why it's important is a part of being a Bitcoin maximalist, I think. So learning about your own philosophy and wrestling with it, I think is a worthwhile exercise that the fiat system really sort of discourages us from exploring. Instead, they want you to obey whatever it is their latest, command might be. whether it's using the right pronouns or not objecting to certain things that they're doing or whatever. This is how they get away with it, is through your complacency. But you need to know what you believe. So my plea to everyone listening would be to figure out what you believe. And, obviously, like, I have my own reasons, but, you come up with yours, right? Like, why are property rights important? Why do we have the right, or why do you believe that each person has the right to life and stuff like that? And if it's not intuitive for you, or if it's not, if you don't know how to sort of justify that at a philosophical level, I would submit that you're going to be kind of vulnerable. It's kind of like leveling up your game in Bitcoin, where you learn about the white paper, you learn about the incentive structure, Austrian economics, all of that. Those things help you hold, right? And similar thing with morality, I think.
Thank you, Jimmy, for your time. Thank you for all that you do for Bitcoin. If you are not following Jimmy Song on Twitter, you're just doing Twitter wrong. So make sure you are following Jimmy. As always, remember to unfollow CK Snarks and follow both P and I. There is a company bet. This is very important. So we did all of our obligatory shills. We said hello. We said goodbye to you. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be Friday, so it'll be a Bitcoin happy hour.
I also just want to say, Jimmy, I appreciate you always engaging with these conversations. I know I come in and I disagree with you on some of this stuff, but one of the things that I deeply appreciate about you is that you're always willing to jump in and just have these conversations openly. So props to you, man.
Hey, I enjoy them, and come anytime to talk about this stuff whenever you want.
Next week, we're going to invite a lawyer to join us when Jimmy comes.
Why? Why would we do that?
Because you clearly do not
I think he wants to hear my rant again or something. I don't know.
Oh, shit. All right. Yeah. Okay.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, do yourself a favor and go look up.
No,
Jimmy.
it was so good. It was so good. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. The Bitcoin 2022 rant that Jimmy went on. It was amazing.
Yeah, so I know, P, you know where it is, but for our audience who doesn't, go look up Jimmy Song, Bitcoin 22 News Desk. It's on the Bitcoin Magazine channel. Dude just tore every lawyer a new asshole. So go have a good laugh. Enjoy that. Jimmy, thank you as always, man. We'll be back tomorrow.
Thanks.
Yes.